Is this new for Samsung, or are you really big in this space?
So Samsung actually reached out and they bought an outdoor LED company in 2015. And it's about the same time Samsung had decided, rightly so, that they really needed to, make a mark in LED, indoor LED and micro LED and things like the wall. That's all Samsung developed and from the ground up. But when it came to outdoor, they went out and they bought a small company in Utah, and that became Prism View. And so and then in the last couple of years, we basically integrated that company into Samsung. So now there's no longer a Prism View, but there is an additional product and services being offered by Samsung, which is the outdoor LED space. So Prism View actually has a long history in the outdoor LED space, in sports, in places like Las Vegas and New York, big spectaculars, all the way down to or out to digital highway billboards. So a lot of experience that was Samsung bought when they bought that company.
Nice. So that's even things like, I guess, the weatherproofing for various weather events at the stadium and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, if you make outdoor LED, you have to really understand the conditions you're putting it in, and it's usually a typical highway billboard right in the middle of Montana somewhere is operating 24/7 for 10 years in the rain, the snow, the heat, the wind, the hail, and you have to have a product that understand. You have to understand those conditions and build a product that meets those conditions.
We just interviewed the Quick Stop, the head of operations, who in Nebraska, he said that the weather they see is absolutely insane. It was like nothing the integrator had ever seen before. And he was like, oh, this is a Tuesday. So can you fill me in a little bit? I'm trying to educate myself, and I know some of our readers are mystified. I see terms like, I think it's IP86 ratings and all this for dust. And how do you know if a system is actually good for all weather conditions?
Yeah, I mean, the IP ratings are important, and often they're part of the requirement by either the consultant or by the stadium authority itself. But it also, I mean, it's why there's fewer people in the outdoor LED business that do sports. Is you have to really understand how to protect the product from, like I said, from all the elements, sun load, heat, cold, and so you have to have experience in a product. It's even beyond the IP rating. You have to have experience in the product that allows you to operate flawlessly, operating 24/7 for 10 years.
And Daniel, something you somewhat related to what you're asking. A big thing that Don dealt with last year at Citi Field with the New York Mets was actually impact from batted balls.
Yeah.
So if when the Mets or the opposing team was taking batting practice, we got some pings from the Mets early in the season, like, hey, we just had two of our hitters just blast the ball off your signage. So what are we going to do to make sure that doesn't happen? So that should, not necessarily weather related, but it's another sort of factor that you don't see if you're putting a LFD in a conference room. There are many more variables in this vertical.
And in the sports space, that's relatively new in sports. People are trying to bring that signage and that experience closer and closer to the field and closer to the fans. And so when we did baseball stadiums 5 years ago, we didn't really concern ourselves with balls hitting the signs because they were up. They were a scoreboard 15 feet in the air, 450 feet from home plate. Well, now they're a lot closer, and Phelps is exactly right. It was an interesting few weeks as we figured out, well, we know how to protect it from sun and from wind and from rain. How about a rawhide baseball going 110 miles an hour? That was a new one for us.
How do you protect a screen and make it bright enough to see from the sun? How do you protect it from impact, from water, from moisture, from dust? Like, how on a physics level does that even work?
So it's a variety of things, right? There's plastic in the front that provides contrast, but also provides protection. The components themselves, in many cases, are like the power supplies. They have to be rated to be outside, or you have to enclose them in something and make it waterproof. And so there's really two basic theories or approaches. You can take everything and stick it in a box and make sure the box is watertight, or you can make sure that the individual components or the groups of components are themselves watertight or are enclosed in that way. So it's two different approaches, and depending on the manufacturer, they use one or the other. Usually, if it's waterproof, then the other thing you got to worry about is just to make sure that it's can handle heat. That handle heat and cold.
Daniel, it's not so dissimilar. I don't know if you're a fast food person or not, but if you were to go to a McDonald's, a Burger King, many other chains, those are just obviously the big ones. If you go through the drive-through, you'll see Samsung LFD in an enclosure, protected from the elements, including heat, at almost every McDonald's and Burger King in the country. So it's essentially a black box surrounding what you would, the normal signage that you're used to seeing.
That's amazing. And I'd imagine as extreme weather events start ramping up as well, we're seeing statistically that's going to become ever bigger in all digital signage, that weatherproofing.
It is. And from my experience, it's not the rain and the snow. It's the hot and the cold, especially heat. That there are challenges sometimes with areas of the country that can get to 120 degrees in direct heat. Plus, some of these are black. They draw more rays from the sun. So it's something we're always working on. And we have a service team that's always available for post sales to make sure that McDonald's in Flagstaff, Arizona is fully functional with their menu boards. A baseball stadium or a football field would be no different.
But is this a passive cooling heat diffusion thing? Do you use fans? Like, what kind of things are the industry using?
Both.
Both. You design the components to basically bleed off heat because you want to try to make sure you keep them as cool as possible. So there's a lot of tech in terms of passive, but fans are our best friend when it comes to certain environments, certain parts of the country. Many times you have to use both. So in Minute Maid, some of the LED that we used has passive cooling, and some of it has fans, depending on the application and the type of product we put in.
Just out of curiosity, in broad terms, roughly, what would be the operating temperature range of a standard LED, for example, and then a weatherproofed LED? Like, what's the difference?
Yes. Well, in terms of standard, I 85C, but we usually have to make sure that and I'm pulling this from my head, which means that the chance that it's actually accurate might be a little low. But like 140C, you have to be able to. Some parts we have to be operate really hot because it's not just the temperature outside, which is a big contributing factor. But remember, these LEDs, or whether it's an LED or whether it's an outdoor menu board, they're black because black gives you great contrast. But black also absorbs sun and sun load like crazy. So they actually get a lot hotter even than the ambient temperature. And so these products have to be able to withstand that, And so we tested to that to make sure.
Where does sustainability fit and ESG in Samsung?
Globally, we have sustainability measures, and even from a PR perspective, it's something we're making the world aware of, frankly. It's hard to find a company, especially in technology now, that's not focused on this, especially as, not, for example, I used to be just a single guy running around, didn't really think about 50, 100 years from now. Now I have a couple little kids, and I wonder, what's their world going to look like in 50 years? So, without getting into all the details, it is a top priority. At our CES press conference, it was one of the main things that was talked about, and will continue to be. Not only getting carbon neutral and some of the things like that, but how can we work with our partners so that our overall solution, not just the Samsung piece, but everything that we're doing going to market with a McDonald's, a Houston Astros, whoever, is aligned on that same focus on sustainability.
Yeah, so it can go from things like making sure that our latest iteration of outdoor product uses 30% less electricity, right, than the previous product, right? That's one way to drive it, right? But even down to, and this is at CES, the latest Samsung TVs on the consumer side, they come built with a solar panel, so that the idea here is if you can keep people from having to put batteries in something every 6 months, that's sustainable, reduces waste, reduces all those things, and you're using the sun. So I think it's almost every Samsung
Yeah,
TV.
I mean, I bought a new TV a month ago, and it's got a solar remote.
Yeah, they all have solar remote. The idea here is using a minimal amount of effort, like put it on a windowsill for half an hour once in a while. You never really have to put batteries in it, ever.
And one of the great things about working at a company the size of Samsung is, we're essentially just a go-to-market subsidiary. Like, I'm dumbing it down, but we're all kind of salespeople here. Whether it's Diane, myself, Don, we're here to sell product. But if you follow the story back all the way to R&D, the size of Samsung allows us to make major strides in what we can do to make the environment better. Like, our factories can become more efficient. The logistics, how we're shipping and our products can become more efficient. So, if you get big brands like Samsung to lean in on, being eco-conscious and all sustainability measures, that can make a big difference.
If you just one last thing on that, because I know it's a big subject for you. If you bought a TV in 5 years ago and you remember what the packaging looked like, buy a Samsung TV today, and the packaging is, there's an absolute effort to use recycled packaging to reduce things like styrofoam and those kinds of things that are tough on the environment. And they put a lot of effort and frankly a lot of money invested into how do you ship a 65-inch TV, protect it, and not have to do the kinds of things that were considered normal 5 years ago.
Well, and it sounds like one of the messages I'm taking away from this, and many events I've been to, experts I've talked to, the data is now showing it's not mutually exclusive to try to do the right thing and also make profits. It turns out as you're doing the right thing, you're also going to make even more profits, maybe. Like, you can do both. Would that be fair to say in this industry?
Yeah, I think so. I think, there's a initial increase in the R&D costs of making packaging, more efficient. You got to do the research, figure out how much can the styrofoam hold, and you don't want to have an issue where all of a sudden your concealed damage is up to 20% and it used to be 1% in the old packaging. So, but once you get that figured out and you're using less cardboard, less styrofoam, it's easier. So instead of fitting 1,000 65-inch TVs on a vessel, you're fitting 1,200 now because they're all more narrow. That sort of economy of scale, or whatever you want to refer to it as, we should benefit from that for years to come. And the good news is our competitors, LG and others, are doing the same thing. So regardless of, the competitive sort of day-to-day battles we have with them, it's a focus for everybody. So we all benefit.
Can you tell me more about this word I learned on the road to, I think it was Austin, Texas, and then Louisville a few weeks ago? Coopetition. I'd never heard that word before. And then we did a review of Kamal Slarty's new book. She worked with Google, lots of big companies. Coopetition, this idea that the new business world in technology is like this, it's an ecosystem. And yeah, people compete, but it's almost in a friendly way. And the industry is helping each other. I don't even know how to put it into words. It's so new to me. What is coopetition, and have you all seen it in action?
Yeah. So again, this is one we won't get too deep into because a lot of this takes place, far in advance of us getting products. But a very simple example would be there are monitor screen sizes, which are a part of our display business, that the Samsung display company does not produce panels for. So we would, in that case, buy the panel size we need from a competitor, many of which the names of, and vice versa. So that I would definitely say is coopetition. We get a size we couldn't have had otherwise, and they sell more panels. That's I would say is the simplest example. Now, that doesn't mean when it comes down to bidding on the Houston Astros and trying to win that business versus Daktronics or some of the other brands that we're not rolling up our sleeves and getting super scrappy and doing whatever we can to beat them. But, we have a lot of similarities with some of these other companies, and we can learn from each other. A lot of people here have come from other companies. I think Diane came from one of our main competitors a few years back. And so there's all sorts of parallels and similarities. And for me, I really don't think it's a negative. Competition brings out the best in both sides, hopefully. And at the end of the day, whether it's an end user on the B2B side or a consumer on the B2C side, that's who really should benefit from it.
I think that, there are universal themes that transcend companies. Sometimes when you look at those things, the greater good is for the greater good. It also improves your own experience in your own company. So those are the kinds of universal themes that we all want to look at.
Now, with this Minute Maid story, can you kind of steer me, because I've never seen this in action, like how does even the bidding process work from the very start? How do you ideate each step of the way? How do you implement? Like, how does that work?
So just mechanically how it works here is we have a group of salespeople. They help uncover opportunities. They would have interaction with both Don's team and the end user, in this case, Houston Astros, to figure out like what is your dream. So Minute Maid, World Series champion multiple times in the last few years. They wanted to make a statement in their outfield. Their perfect scenario would have looked like X. They challenge us to come back with what we can do to meet that request. We work internally to say, here's scenario A, B, and C. Scenario A might be $100 million, and then work down for B and C. We do the best we can to deliver on their highest expectation at a number that makes sense for us. And then ultimately, and I'm leaving out some details, but ultimately they get a bunch of bids. They generally have a consultant in place who will say, I've worked with Samsung. They're great to work with. This looks really good, or vice versa. They might dislike working with Samsung. Hopefully not, but. And then in most cases, between the end user and the consultant, they lay all these out, analyze what they think makes the most sense. And then they pick the brand that they're going to go with. One caveat and an area that we generally benefit from is we truly believe we're, world-class in terms of supply chain. In most categories, we own supply chain from A to Z. We have factories all over the world, but coincidentally for us, we have one in Mexico. So our lead times can be a little shorter. We can react quicker. We can, in the Houston Astros case, I don't think they visited our factory, but we always make that offer to come see where your stuff's being built, the efficiencies, the cleanliness, all that other type of stuff. So all that, some of that's more on the periphery than at the end of the day, getting a piece of paper and saying, all right, it's the X million dollars and we want to do it. But that's kind of the flow of the business. And then, Don can jump in and give you a lot more detail.
And let me take something. It's been really interesting 4 or 5 years, in this business, and really where the business is going, really suits Samsung. So you talked about it at the beginning, right? You seem to think that so many years ago, one company owned the market, but Samsung has more pieces of glass, more different kinds of pieces of glass than anybody else in this business, right? Everything from 1 inch square you wear on your wrist to 90,000 square feet at SoFi hanging from the 50-yard line, right? So, and everything in between. And I think when we talk about like the Houston Astros, yes, there can be a bid process, but often we walk in from a consulting standpoint, and to Phelps's point. Really dive into what do they want to do? What kind of experience do they want their fans to have? And, how can we create these moments of exclusivity, or how can we create a situation where they can change the feel and the experience for the fans simply by what they put on their screens, when they put it on, and what message they're giving. And so it sounds very squishy, right? Touchy-feely, but in the end, what we're selling, we're not selling pieces of glass. And we're not selling pieces of glass anymore, just like the Astros weren't just trying to show the score in the center field, right? That scoreboard is not a scoreboard. It's an experiential machine that allows them to really help their fans really enjoy the game. And so because we have all these pieces of glass, we can talk to them about what do they want to do, right? And what's happened is it's not just the hardware, but the hardware and the software has combined. If you go to a game today, particularly like in the NFL or the NBA, they use those pieces of glass to really change the mood and the temperament and the experience of the fans, right? And so and that becomes like a digital canvas, much more so than something that's just displaying information about who scored what and who's at bat.
What do you think is the secret? And I love the way you phrased that, because we had a great conversation with Chris Devlin over at Omnivex about similar things, creating a dynamic digital canvas. And I've heard at many events, a lot of experts saying, look, stop selling products, start creating experiences. I don't care if it's retail, I don't care if it's sports, I don't care if you're in a school, lecture hall at a university. How do you create a captivating experience, and how does the industry pivot towards experiential mindset, if you will?
Well, I think the first places that did that were it was very practical. The Jets and the Giants share a stadium. The Rams and the Chargers share a stadium. And if you're that team, the last thing you want is to walk into a stadium, if you're the Chargers, and the stadium still look like it's a Rams stadium, right? You want your own team, you want your own colors, you want your own advertisers, you want your own partners, and digital products and displays make that so much easier. There are teams, and I mentioned the Jets and the Giants, where every Sunday there's a team of people that are scrambling around the stadium, pulling off static signage from the Jets and putting it up for the Giants, and then 2 days later taking it down again, right? So those kinds of things, those teams are always the ones looking for, how do I make that experience unique, but also how do I make it easier for me to do that?
And Daniel, just to jump on that, one more note, and the entire industry benefits from this. This isn't just a Samsung thing, but when you're talking about the owners of sports teams, you're truly talking about some of the most successful people in the world, like from a wealth perspective. Like they've either created a business, taking bets on themselves, and now they can afford these franchises, which the most recent, I think the Washington Commanders just sold for $6 billion. The Broncos sold for $4.5 billion last year to the family that owns Walmart, or at least some of those people. So it's an ego-driven sort of thing. So it also has become a bit of an arms race. Like you don't want to come to Citi Field and see the biggest scoreboard in Major League Baseball, and then for the Mets, and then announce to your team or to your fan base that you're putting in a new scoreboard too, and it's 1/10 the size of what's in Citi Field. Like, so there is the ability from to play to the egos of some of these owners, and frankly, the ones we've interacted with have been very supportive. They want the best sort of experience for their fans, and a lot of times that means digital signage. And I think, personally speaking, not that you asked, but my favorite stadium in the country at this point is where the Raiders play in Las Vegas. I think the design of the stadium, the look and feel of it inside and out, not just the signage, the colors. I mean, I just think it's a 10 out of 10 the way they did that stadium. And we were fortunate enough to be a part of it. I would say that if it was Daktronics too, if it looked exactly the same. But that ownership group now can, pound their chest a little bit and say, arguably, they have the best stadium in the NFL. And the next ones, the Buffalo Bills are coming, the Tennessee Titans are coming in the next 3 to 5 years. There's a high likelihood that they now have the best stadium. So that part of it is pretty cool because they're challenging us to come up with solutions so they can say, oh, that's never been done before in the NFL. That's what we want. And then we challenge our world-class team, R&D team in Korea, and hopefully we can come back with something that wins us the opportunity.
Do you think that this kind of arms race is one of the factors that helps bring about the next generation and next iteration in the industry? Like it's almost like the space race in the 60s, right? With microwaves were invented and so forth.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's that, and these new owners, they're very hyper successful. Most of them are not afraid to take risks. Most of them are not afraid to really think deeply about doing something different than doing the same old. And so that helps in itself, whether it's bigger or brighter, the fact that they're really thinking about again, this idea of experience, about how they transform the experience for their fans. They use every tool at their disposal. Video and audio happen to be a big part of that, but they use every tool at their disposal to make sure that their fans feel like they've been transformed from sitting on a wooden seat, like I said, watching the score change, to something much more immersive.
And I think when you're talking about that level of wealth, anybody with billions can go buy a yacht or go buy their 10th home. There's a finite number of professional sports teams in the world. The number rarely changes. 30, 32 NFL teams, 30 or 32 Major League Baseball teams. Once you become the owner of that, I imagine you never want to let it go. And you want to be able to say to your fans, we have the best experience in sports. Now there's anomalies, like some stadiums are just very old and traditional, like a Wrigley Field in Chicago or a Fenway in Major League Baseball, where they don't necessarily need to make the same investment because the stadium kind of sells itself. But all these newer franchises with newer stadiums or plans to convert to new stadiums, they're trying to deliver a digital, super high quality experience for their fan base. Because at the end of the day, whether the team is good or bad, if the experience in the stadium for kids and for, people going on dates and older couples that are trying to have a great night out, that'll keep people coming back.
And not to get too woo, but kind of like Don, to your point, it really does make the world a little bit brighter in a weird way. This is an industry that brightens people's day.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Again, it's not just experiential, it's positive, impactful experience, right? I mean, I can have a experience at a stadium that could be negative, right? The parking's bad, things like that. But really, how do you impact it in a way that people go, that was the best part of my month, was going to that game?
I had a Red Sox joke that I'm going to hold back because I don't offend anybody. We'll just tuck that down inside.
I'm a Yankee fan, so Diane and I are Yankee fans, so you can bring it out.
Next time I might be bold. If you guys had one piece of advice to close with, because you're very experienced from the industry, how can the industry get better? Whether it's accessibility, sustainability, technology, content, you name it. Like, what's the burning thing the industry needs to hear?
I think the industry, to get better, needs to continue to think more holistically versus pieces and parts. This industry was very much pieces and parts 5-6 years ago, and I think all the positive and good things that are happening are from people who start thinking in terms of what is that holistic experience, and how do I make technology part of it, but not how to make technology part of it without making technology overwhelming.